typically start off with a social where people talk about sort of, where they're located, and, feel free to share something about yourself, and then a little bit about what brings you to tonight's discussion. I guess it's a lecture discussion, but it'll be. No worries. There was, I think he didn't realize he was on mute, off mute. So if anyone wants to start off, would love to meet some of you, if you're interested in sharing.
We did a little bit of chit chat before you came on, because we were, being really obsessive compulsive and dialing in early. I guess we're coming from different places to come here. I saw you through a meetup group with New York, which was associated with a DC meetup group on culture and history. And I liked the topic. I know nothing about how you're presenting it. And I live just outside Washington, DC.
Cool. And sorry I wasn't on video before, now I am. So welcome from DC I'm in the New York City area. And I welcome feedback on how I'm presenting it, and we'll have plenty of time for you to add your own 2 cents. If there is anything that I missed, we do that in the conversation portion. We're a very collaborative group, and so everybody's thoughts, ideas, and additions are welcome. So it's not a one-directional teaching organization. We're all about teach each other, and we do have a presentation, but there's also just as much learning in the conversation as there is in the presentation.
Okay, great.
Michael, if you don't mind, I'll make you an admin, like a co-host, just in case.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You're probably not used to dealing with if we get troll bombers, but just in case, I like to have a couple of co-hosts. Anyone else want to introduce themselves and sort of say where you're dialing in from, and what brings you to tonight's session, and anything that you want to share about yourself is welcome as well.
Well, I'll go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Okay, my name's Michael Strasberg. I live in Central Jersey, right on the Pennsylvania state line. And I've been a member of the Freethinker Association, the Freethinker Institute for a while. I'm 68, I'll be 69 next month. I'm a dentist. And I really enjoyed this group because I get intellectual stimulation. And I also have been able to undertake some of the things which I had wanted to undertake, but had not undertaken, because of the guidance and the encouragement I've gotten here. And that's enriched my life and expanded my horizons. So I try to be here all the time. I missed last week because a friend from South Carolina just showed up. I hadn't seen her in more than a year. Tuesday was the only night we could get together, so we had dinner together. But usually I'm here. And welcome to everybody. Hi to everybody.
Thanks, Michael. And Michael is a member of the FTI, and so that's part of what he's talking about there is, for people that are members, we we meet every week, and we create accountability partners, and we kind of help each other make progress towards achieving goals. And so that's been helpful for a lot of us, to have sort of peers help sort of keep us accountable towards our own goals even. Feel free to look. I posted some information about the organization in the chat that people can look at. But anyone else want to go ahead? Anyone else want to introduce themselves?
I'm still setting up. This is Michael. Let me introduce myself, take the opportunity, and then I'll set up. Hi, I'm Michael. You only see my head. I'm not quite set up yet, but I live in the DC Metro. I've got a bit of technical background, C-level executive with several corporations. Been enjoying this group, the FTI, for only a few weeks. Unfortunately, I do have another event that is just as interesting and just as critical thinking that happens on the same night. So unfortunately, I've had to pick and choose the events that I can attend, but certainly been enjoying this. This has been quite lucky for me to find this group. So I'll just say hello to everyone.
Hey, Mary, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Hi, I'm Mary. I'm in South Jersey. So I found the FTI Institute on Meetup, and I've been attending these get-togethers for, I guess, about 3 months, maybe more. It sounded really interesting and intellectual, but I'm finding that it's way above my level of intellect, but I'm thinking eventually it's going to stick with me and I'm just going to become a smarter, intelligent person. So thank you. Sometimes I have no idea what you are talking about, but it's good to hear it. At least it'll, you know, I'm not a virgin to the terms that I've heard. So thank you very much. It's very engaging and yeah. So
Great.
thank you for having us.
Welcome to have you. And Mary, when you have questions, do raise your hand and ask them, because if you have a question, what I've learned in life is when I have a question, there's always other people that have that question. And I'll bet that's true about every question you have at these events. So definitely raise your hand, ask the questions. Don't feel like there are dumb questions. There are no dumb questions.
No, I don't. But I figure I could like do some research too. And they're probably just simple terms that I've, you know, never heard before. But I appreciate that, Jared. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Sean, you have your hand up. Go ahead. Good to see you, buddy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sean. I live in Southburg, Maryland. Today is a critical thinking. I think last week we did the same subject.
Well, different
like
aspects of critical thinking. We're going to be talking about critical thinking for, you know, the next month and a half, basically.
I see.
But different aspects of critical thinking.
Here's my hope, Gary. If after this session, okay, or whatever sessions, right, after critical thinking, if anybody think 2020 election is stolen, and after this seminar, and then they can change their mind, man, that's great, okay? But have critical thinking, you know, to say 2020 election is stolen is wrong. If you have critical thinking, you know, it's not true. Okay, it's very simple. President name, senators, representatives, same ballot. Why not change somebody else? Only change Donald Trump, right? That's simple. You have brain, you know. It's such a simple thing. Okay. Sorry, I brought politics.
Yeah, you're definitely on very clear on who you think is telling the real news.
Yes, you have really critical thinking. Look, they always have the election fraud. Somebody maybe vote twice. I would say Republican more likely vote twice. Why? Because like New Yorkers, okay, they're rich. They have a house in Florida, man. They vote in New York and then go to Florida. You know, take 4 hours right there. Vote second time, right? It's such a simple thing, but that's no such a thing. Anyway, I hope your seminar can change somebody's mind. Okay, critical thinking.
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about in critical thinking is how do we come to the conclusion of whether or not the election was stolen, rather than telling people whether or not the election was stolen. So it's a little bit more root cause than, you know, trying to tell people what the right and wrong answer is. We don't want to do that. We want to help people improve their thinking processes so that each individual can come to the best conclusion that they can based on their own reasoning. You know, really empowering the individual ultimately. So that said, it's great to see you, Sean, as always. And thank you.
And also recently, Robert Jr., the candidate, right? That guy, I just can't believe he's a vaccine denier. Okay, if he had a little critical thinking, and I don't know, he's just so look. We have polio, smallpox, or affect human beings 1,000 years. Because the vaccine we eliminate, it's such simple.
Hey, Sean.
It's very easy to think, but he's still thinking
Sean,
vaccine is bad.
I think Michael's going to tell you to let other
Go
people
ahead, man.
talk. So, Sean loves to talk, and I get that. I do too. So,
Okay.
but let's let Yakub.
Yes.
Great. Go ahead, Yakub.
Hi. This is my first time being part of this group. I guess I wanted to learn more about it and to kind of understand what you do. I was looking for secular groups in my area. So, so I saw Humanist and I thought that might be an overlap. So I'd love to hear more about what your group does.
Cool. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to the FTI, which we advertised to the Secular Humanist group as well. We advertised to a bunch of meetups, and so I'll do a quick intro about our organization. We're collaborators with the Humanist meetup. I'm a humanist myself, but the organization is a little is different. We're just collaborators with that meetup. So. Anyone else want to introduce themselves and sort of what brings them to tonight's event?
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Would you like me to do the referee work that usually Ellie does?
If you don't mind, I would really appreciate that.
Okay, no problem at all. I just didn't understand. Okay, I'll be present.
Awesome. If you can, like, Ellie can't make it tonight. She wanted to let people know, but I don't think she's going to be able to make it tonight. So if you can do that, that'd be great.
Okay, very good. I will do that.
By the way, I may, like, if there's background noise from people, I'll mute them. In general, it's probably better to mute because we have a big group if you're not speaking, but yeah, just a suggestion for those not on mute, because a lot of times we get people with background noise that don't realize they're not on mute. So you may be better off muting unless you're in a definitely quiet place, which is okay to stay off mute if you want. I don't want to cramp people's style, but anyone else want to do a quick introduction?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, name is John. I'm in Philadelphia, and the title really interested me because evidence evaluation, but I mean, I'm thinking like a crime scene or something like that, but I'm not sure if that's really what you're focusing on.
Well, it depends on what you mean by a crime scene, John. Like sometimes some of the things that go on that I think that people aren't evaluating the evidence right should be a crime scene and might well be, but it's not exactly what we're focused on tonight. But it's I'll give an intro like as I begin the presentation. So but it's not quite a crime scene evidence evaluation. It's more about evidence that we encounter in life. Like when we get data sources and information in, how do we know which ones are credible and which ones are not credible? Yeah.
Okay, I got it. All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's evaluating the evidence that we come across in our lives, basically.
Okay.
Anyone else want to do an intro? All right, then I'll go ahead and do a quick, I'll introduce myself first. So my name's Garrett Lang. I'm a software, I have 3 monitors, by the way, so I'll be looking in all different directions. My presentation is that way and my notes are that way. So, and then you guys are in front of me. So I'm a software developer turned software inventor and now an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy. I'm also the executive director of the Freethinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you to tonight's event. We're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members, and we really want to help people be the best versions of themselves, to help them seek truth and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events every Tuesday evening like this one. This is part of our free event series with a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. You probably didn't take a critical thinking skills 101 in college. Well, we have a 2-month series on critical thinking because I think it's that important that it needs it. And so we have weekly members only events that where we apply practical wisdom into our daily lives, and where we're sort of getting to know a new friend group that of people that want to be the best versions of ourselves, seek truth and be fair. I will also share more information about the FTI in the chat for people who want to get more information offline. We have past events on YouTube as well. We have only one rule in the FTI, and that is to remain polite. All ideas are welcome, even unsavory ideas. As long as you say it politely, you're welcome to share anything you want. If your idea is not very well received, then someone else may comment about why they disagree with it. But most importantly, we want to encourage people, rather than say why they disagree with something, is to ask questions about why other people have the beliefs that they do. And I think we learn a lot more from understanding why someone that has a very different idea than us has that idea, and how they defend it, and how they can see a reason to defend something that we think is indefensible. And so we learn a lot more by empathizing with that person and understanding where they come from, rather than telling them that they're wrong. We don't learn from that. So
what kind of topics did you explore in the past?
So a wide range of stuff, everything from, very theoretical stuff like, do we have free will, to, spirituality, how science can be compatible with religion, and what I call non-science, which could be theoretical philosophy, religion, spirituality. We at the end of the year last year, we did a year in review, and that's the best time. Like, we'll probably post that at some point, and that's the best place to get the full list of everything we covered for the year from last year. And I'm probably going to do that again this year. And so, but it's a wide range of topics, just things that are not, like I said, not typically covered in academia or industry. And if you have topics that are of interest to you guys, like we have an online community in Discord, there's a Discord channel where you can suggest topic ideas. And if it's something that people are interested in, like, we'll probably hold a topic on, we can hold an event on that topic. Right now we're booked for about 2 months out, but we'll add it to the agenda. And we also have in-person events in New York City. I just posted one today. I just put an event up. I think it's August 5th is our next event in New York City for anyone in the New York City area. So I think I saw someone in the chat in New York City. It was Carly. So for those in New York City, we meet in person as well. Go ahead.
I'm curious. I'm not in New York City now. I'm in Philadelphia, but I was born and raised in New York City and lived there most of my life. So I can get to New York City like in about an hour. So cool. I'm just wondering though, what part of New York City is these meetings? Uptown, downtown?
Midtown.
Midtown.
The one on the 5th is Midtown. We generally meet at Midtown at a bar restaurant called American Whiskey. That's our recent place to go to. So yeah, that's generally
is that around the Port Authority by any chance?
I don't think it's far from Port Authority. It's really close to Madison Square Garden. So yeah, that's like, yeah.
Oh, okay. That's still pretty close. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. So that said, I'm gonna go ahead.
Hey, quick question.
Yeah.
This group has a lot of potential.
Thank you.
So I think I mentioned this to you. Critical thinking, I consider as probably the most important thing people could learn. And I do go to schools, to K through 12 schools, and do a very light version of, talking about critical thinking. We do some practices, et cetera, et cetera. So elevating that, in the US society, some of the data that I've seen, to me indicates there may not be any more than 10 to 20% of Americans that are critical thinkers. Now, why is that important? I think it would be wonderful if we could meet in different cities if you could hold meetings in different cities. So the key question, I mean, this was a long way of asking a simple question. How many total members do you have right now?
So there are different ways to answer that. We advertise to a very large group of people through all of our partner meetups. Members of the FTI is a separate thing. We have like what's called membership, where you apply for membership and can get accepted as a member. And that's a very small group of people where we're applying practical philosophy into our daily lives. But I think for what you're talking about, which is about increasing the number of critical thinkers, that's something, and having events in different parts of the country and the world. I'm very open to talking to anyone that wants to create a meetup in their area, and I'll collaborate with you and help provide, copy and resources to help create organizers in different parts of the world so that people can create FTI meetups in other areas. And I've helped people do that in the past, and I'm very, interested in helping people do that, because I think the more that we can all help each other grow, learn, and develop, that, I held an event on what I think is the meaning of life. And I think it is literally that, is to learn, grow, and develop for each one of us, and to learn as much as we can. We held another event on reincarnation, where we learned that science has pretty much validated that reincarnation is right. So that learning might go beyond the grave from what it seems like science is saying. So I think learning, growing, and developing is really important, and I want to facilitate that with as many people as possible. So anyone that wants to be an organizer anywhere in the world, like, reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat so that people can reach out to me. So yeah.
So the value that I see is not onesie twosies, people that try to think, try to validate sources of data, read technical journals, publicly refereed, etc., etc. The value, the exponential value, comes from actually meeting others that do the same thing.
I think that's a great point, and I am getting requests to get started. Mike,
Okay.
I would love
Can I interject here?
Yeah, but quickly.
Okay. When Garrett presents, it's going to create a lot of wish, a lot of desire to comment or to ask questions. But it's also very important for Garrett to have flow so he can continue his thoughts and make it a coherent discussion. So what we ask is that everybody jot down or remember the idea or the question. And then when that ends, when Garrett ends his presentation, raise your hand, with the app, raise your hand, and you'll be called on. And you might have more than one question or more than one comment, but we ask you to limit it to just one comment or one question, and try to keep that to about 2 or 3 minutes, because we have a lot of people participating and we want everybody to be able to get ask their question or make their comment. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, and it's even less about my flow, because I tend to be able to pick up where I left off, but most people had trouble following the presentation when we got questions along the way. So I got a lot of requests from the audience to just go through the entire presentation first and then save questions till the end. I always liked taking them along the way, but actually, most people preferred that they could listen to a cohesive presentation. So we're going to do it that way, my popular opinion. So today we're talking about evidence evaluation. I'll talk about how this fits into what I call the sort of tower of critical thinking that I've put together. And so I'll share that in a minute, but I want to first go through the agenda for today. I'm going to talk about what evidence evaluation is. A bunch of people have asked me that, or some people have asked me that, so I'm going to cover that. We'll talk about the types of evidence and pros and cons. We'll talk about why evidence evaluation is important, and then the steps of evidence evaluation, which includes gathering evidence, evaluating the source, evidence quality, and interpreting and understanding the evidence. That said, this is what I call the tower of critical thinking, and it's the sort of roadmap for our series on critical thinking, which we're on week 2 of. Last week was information literacy and research. And that sort of is the gathering of individual, data points. Evidence evaluation is taking those data points and evaluating whether or not they're credible or not. And you'll notice that the smaller rectangle than the research and info literacy, because you discount the stuff that is not credible. And then you have biases, which will sometimes lead you off a cliff where it's, leading you in a bad direction where you're getting a misunderstanding. Certain types of inference will do the same thing, and fallacies will almost always lead you off a cliff where you're getting bad information. And so those don't lead to the top of the tower of critical thinking and wisdom. Now, formal logic is very consistent. We'll cover that in another week. And each one of these rectangles is something that we're going to cover in a week of lecture discussion. Usually the lectures are around half an hour to 45 minutes. And then we have mostly discussion for the evening. And then types of inference and formal logic are both ways of taking data points and using different types of logic. Formal logic is one type of logic, inference are different types of logic, and coming up with conclusions which teach us about things about objective reality, and then ideally help us make better decisions. And I would argue better decisions means decisions that prevent significant unnecessary harm from happening to anyone, period, full stop. And then, further serve to increase happiness and decrease harm. And this is a slight riff on utilitarianism that I use to address some of the criticisms of utilitarianism, although I'm largely aligned with it. I think I've improved on it a little bit. And so this is what I would call wisdom, which is making better decisions, which I described to my kids today. They were like, Daddy, what's wisdom? And I'm like, wisdom is making better decisions. And knowledge about objective reality helps enable us to make better decisions, which is why it's the foundation for wisdom. So that's kind of what I call the tower of critical thinking, which we're going through over the next month and a half. After today, I think it's about a month and a half of lectures left. So that said, what is evidence evaluation? So we're going to talk about, it's basically a systematic approach to looking at, and scrutinizing the quality and relevance of evidence, supporting or refuting any perspective. Now, this is where it says a claim or a study. Evidence evaluation is, often looked at technically for people running scientific studies, but we should all use it in average everyday life. And there are different types of evidence that we're going to go through along with their pros and cons. Empirical evidence, anecdotal evidence, logical evidence, statistical evidence, and testimonial evidence. Anecdotal evidence, you probably have heard people say that's just anecdotal evidence, and we'll talk about why they say that. So that said, empirical evidence is the first one we're going to talk about. It's basically, things that, are acquired through observation, experimentation, and experience through direct or indirect means, and the advantage is that it's very reliable. If you have a methodical way of gathering data in a statistically significant data, which means enough data that it's not just, that randomness can't, cause misunderstanding. And that data is gathered in a way that is, scientifically valid and independently verifiable, meaning you create a process for gathering that data, which this is what scientific experiments do, by the way, is they come up with empirical evidence. And what they do is they create a process for gathering that data, and that process can be repeated by someone who doesn't agree with the results of the study, and they can gather the data their same way and see whether or not they can repeat the results of that study. And if a skeptic can't repeat the results of the study, then that means it may not, it may be that the person who did the first study was a little biased in their way of, doing things. So empirical evidence is really important. It's the foundation of scientific research. It is very time consuming and expensive. And so, in order to gather statistically significant data in a repeatable way, but I also don't want to dissuade people from thinking that it's unachievable, because using tools like ChatGPT to figure out how would I gather empirical evidence for a study for yourself, you could probably come up with your own way of doing this. And I plan to do that for the Freethinker Institute. To be honest, I want to prove that we actually have a statistically significant impact on the happiness that people that are members of the FTI experience, and the amount of harm that they experience, that the harm is going down and the happiness is going up, basically, which is part of our goal for existing as an organization, is to increase happiness and decrease harm. And so this is not, in my opinion, unachievable, but it can be difficult and time consuming to do it in a methodical way. So statistical evidence is basically data that is represented in a quantifiable manner, trying to look at trends and relationships. It can be persuasive and objective, but it can also be misinterpreted and manipulated. And I'm going to give an example of where it was. So I'm going to ask the audience, to raise your hand at this juncture. Look at this graph, and what this graph shows is organic food sales and a graph of organic food sales. And in addition to that graph of organic food sales, you see the autism prevalence, and you'll see that those two are going up at the same time. And so what I want to ask people is, how could this be a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of these statistics? Does anyone want to raise their hand and venture to guess? Go ahead, Yakub.
It's probably a spurious correlation. It could be that people who are very health conscious, who really care about their health, might buy into the fact that organic food is better than conventional food, and so they might be attracted. So people with such prevalences or tendencies might be attracted to the view that autism is also a problem.
Okay. DLJ, do you want to take a quick guess?
Yeah, as a parent of 2 autistic children, I'm familiar with this one. It's very obvious from the graph that organic food causes autism.
All right, so that's your opinion. I'm going to tell you another way of interpreting this graph.
Can I just give the real answer?
Yeah.
Because that's the misrepresentation.
Yes, that's the misrepresentation. So go ahead.
Yeah, so our kids.
Little surprised.
Our kids' behavior did change when we took out preservatives, colorants, and additives from their diets. So actually going to our local farm and killing our own chickens. Well, we didn't go that far. But in fact, yeah, the less processed foods, it actually did change their behavior, and it also made me a lot healthier as well. So my hay fever went away, oddly enough. Yeah, so that word gets around on internet forums, and then everybody goes, "Oh, well, I'll try that for my kids." That's why, therefore, there's a spike in both.
Maybe. So I have a different interpretation. I'm going to let Carly go, and then I'm going to give my answer. And we're the Freethinker Institute, so everyone's answer is valid, and you each have to decide which one makes the most sense for yourself. But Carly, go ahead.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the information is random. I think the 2 graphs, they're randomly placed together. I don't see that the parallel lines indicate a relationship between the 2, despite what the graph is trying to convey.
Yeah, so I'm going to argue there is a relationship, but I'm going to explain what it is, if you guys don't mind. That was a bunch of answers, and I really appreciate those. But I do want to share what I think is really going on here. So before, I think it's the late 1990s, there really was no organic food, because all food was organic. There were no GMOs introduced. So actually what this is showing is not the introduction of organic food, but actually the introduction of GMO food. And so actually, this is the rise of sales of GMO food, and organic food started going up because it got more, more people became aware that GMOs were being sold and they wanted to buy organic. So organic food rose at the same time that GMOs were introduced. And so actually the introduction of of organic food, the increase of sales of organic food corresponds to the impact time period that GMOs were introduced to society. So actually, the interesting thing is this graph was showed to me by someone on social media who was trying to prove that organic food causes autism. But the thing is, before the 1990s, all food was organic food. So why would autism suddenly spike when, suddenly we start labeling food as organic? Actually, all food was organic food before that. So there's no reason that autism would rise, with the increase of sales of organic food when all food was organic before that. So actually, like, the correct use of the statistic, in my opinion, is that it was the increase of GMO food sales, which they increased during this time period, after originally being licensed and approved by the FDA, that autism went up. So actually, the funny part is that the guy that shared this with me was sharing statistics with me that made him think that he was right, but he was actually proving himself wrong with the statistics that he shared with me, which, there's so much irony in life. And so that's where statistics can be misused if you don't apply critical thinking to the data you see. And when something sounds suspect, don't just trust your confirmation bias, meaning your current beliefs. Like, look for other solutions and look for what is the most reasonable, rational explanation, and, try to keep things in context, and, look, step back from the picture. And we'll talk a lot about, looking at things from an objective perspective as we talk about critical thinking skills over the next few months. So that said, the next type of evidence is testimonial evidence or anecdotal evidence. Now, that's basically a personal narrative. I've had a lot of people tell me, the coronavirus vaccine is causing harm. I know someone whom this happened to. They took the vaccine and then 2 weeks later they were sick. And so it's anecdotal evidence. The problem is that it is very relatable and it's very engaging. It creates a human experience that someone is sharing about a scenario, and they're very compelling. Like, if you see a lot of sales use anecdotes. If you see testimonials on a website, they're very impactful for people. And I have had people tell me that, that they think that, a lot of anecdotes are made up on websites, and I would not be surprised if that were true. Like, they said it about mine, and ours were not, but it would not surprise me if people are making up anecdotes to feed their confirmation bias. And I think it's really important that, we look at testimonial evidence or anecdotal evidence with a grain of salt, because it is someone's experience and it is their perspective, but even their perspective may be a misunderstanding. The person who told me that someone got a coronavirus vaccine and then 2 weeks later, had internal hemorrhaging, like, that may just have been a coincidence. Now, if it wasn't a coincidence, it would be something that would show up in scientific studies, because people look at, what kind of medical impacts coronavirus vaccines have. And we did an event on coronavirus vaccines, and we looked at the impact of vaccines globally and death rates, et cetera, and we, tried to challenge whether or not any of the criticisms of the vaccines were valid. And I think we had a pretty good argument that in order for that to be the case, you would have to have every single country in the world sort of collaborating on this very big conspiracy theory that there's no real motive for. But That said, people do have their anecdotal evidence that they use to justify things, and we just have to remember that there's a lot of misunderstanding that can happen for any individual. We all have misunderstandings. That's one thing that's part of the human experience. And what's important is that we be cognizant that we have misunderstandings, and that so do the people telling us stories. And you know, we want to, if we hear anecdotes that say that something may be true, it's good to look for statistics. And you know, this back to back to empirical evidence, we want to look for empirical evidence that validates that anecdotal evidence. So anecdotal evidence should lead us to search for empirical or statistical evidence that backs up that anecdote. If we can't find that, then maybe the anecdote was actually a misunderstanding or just a blip, right? It could be a statistical anomaly and the person was actually right about this was internal bleeding because of the vaccine, but it's like the 1 in 10 million people that had that internal bleeding, so it wasn't ever caught by anyone else. So that's possible too. So next is documentary evidence. This is evidence that is documented, like written, print, digital, emails, reports, letters, photographs. It's direct, detailed, and concrete information. The downside is that the authenticity or accuracy of documents might not be clear. There was a big controversy about President Obama and whether or not he was a US citizen. And then eventually he showed his birth certificate, which is a really hard to falsify piece of evidence. And then there was this whole, you know, movement that that birth certificate is not legitimate. That was an example of documentary evidence being given that, you know, would have had to have been like very eloquently falsified in order to convince, you know, the powers that be that that he should have become president when in fact he wasn't a U.S. citizen. So you know, this is you know, helpful, but you have to take with a grain of salt where this documentary evidence comes from and whether or not it's a credible source, and we'll talk more about that later. Experimental evidence is, you know, results from a carefully controlled experiment designed to test a hypothesis. This is, you know, the level that I was talking about earlier of the empirical evidence when it's applied to an experiment is basically when you're getting like really nitty-gritty detailed, like I want to create a cause and effect relationship, you know, from a statistically significant sample, and I want to show that if X happens, then Y will be the result. And this is just very costly and time consuming. And, you know, and if you have small sample sizes, then it's not statistically significant. And if you have large sample sizes, then it's often costly and time consuming. Analogical evidence is comparing two similar cases in order to argue that what's true for one is also true for the other, making, you know, like a comparison does simplify concepts that may be complex, but it can also oversimplify things. There's what's called the slippery slope fallacy, which we'll talk about in fallacies. And if you try to make a comparison that's a false comparison, then it can lead you to the wrong conclusion by having an unsound analogy. And a lot of people try to do this, and they say, well, it's just like when X happened, you know, what's an example? See if I can come up with one off the top of my head. Like, yeah, like, you know, the US government, there was, what was it? There were like examples of like, and I'm forgetting like the specific example. Someone might be able to raise their hand and come up with a great example of this. Well, like the, you know, probably when the CIA unseated the head of the democratically elected Iranian government, right? That wasn't public information. And so some people could say, well, when the government, you know, unseated the democratically elected government of Iran, they didn't share that. They were keeping it as a secret. And now they're keeping as a secret the fact that the coronavirus vaccine is causing more harm than it's helping. And therefore, the coronavirus vaccine is a terrible thing, right? That's an unsafe analogy. right? One is comparing CIA clandestine operations, which are kept secret for government state secret reasons, which I didn't agree with the unseating of the democratically elected government of Iran. But that said, I wasn't born then. So, but I'm just saying it's a false analogy. And so you do have to be skeptical of analogical evidence and know whether or not it really is a safe analogy to make. Are these really comparable situations where someone is saying this is just like that situation? Is it really just like that situation? And you have to ask yourself whether or not it's a safe analogy to make. Now, why is evidence evaluation important? Really unsound evidence is going to lead you to unsound conclusions. If you have bad evidence, you're going to make bad decisions. And if you don't have a clear picture of the way that the world works, then you're going to make bad decisions for yourself and the people you can influence. And for example, if you think that the coronavirus vaccine is causing more harm than it's saving, than the lives that it saves, then you may not get the vaccine. And if you're in the 70-year-old plus age category, you're at a very high risk of dying of coronavirus. And so your actual life could be at stake for having that misunderstanding about whether or not the coronavirus vaccine is safe. And there are people that are not good candidates for the vaccines. And then there's another backup option for those people that we talked about in that event. But and I keep coming back to coronavirus vaccine, but anyway, we need to understand the bias and the sources of evidence to understand whether or not those sources of evidence are actually accurate. And we talked a little bit about the sources that we can trust in last week's lecture and what makes a source trustworthy, but we're going to talk more about that today as well. So let's talk about the steps of evidence evaluation. We're going to go into each one in more detail. We want to gather the available evidence. We're going to evaluate the source. We're going to assess the quality of the evidence. And, we'll, in order to do that, we would use the tools on trust that we talked about last week. We would interpret and understand the evidence, ensure that what the context of the evidence gathered is, like how was that evidence gathered? If you have an extremely politically biased source that is the one gathering data, and lo and behold, their data supports their own political ideology, probably not a super trustworthy source if it can't be independently gathered by another objective source. You want your first goals to be to seek truth and to be fair, rather than to be right about your current beliefs, because when you're understanding evidence, if you're looking for the truth first, you're going to be far more likely to be aligned with objective reality. And I like to say that the truth is eternal and it bends its will to no person, because the truth is the truth about objective reality. Our understandings of it evolve over time, but the truth is the truth, and we should be looking for it rather than trying to be right about our current beliefs. Then you want to apply the evidence, which we're going to talk about in future weeks. And now let's go into those in more detail. Gathering available evidence. You want to get comprehensive research about a topic that's really important to you. The different types of evidence are primary, secondary,
Robert Kennedy Jr.
Sorry, you're not on mute. I'm just gonna mute. So the primary are firsthand accounts, which could be like a diary of a victim or a perpetrator of a victim or a perpetrator of a crime. Secondary is someone interpreting a primary source, like a textbook or a biography or a critique of a primary source. A tertiary source is summaries or overviews of primary or secondary sources like encyclopedias, dictionaries, directories, almanacs. Fact-checking websites are also tertiary sources, although I would argue these can be very good sources because they are looking for objective truth and to try to summarize objective truth about a specific topic. We also have to be aware of potential bias in the evidence collection, as I alluded to earlier. Like if your source is a politically biased source and it's supporting that political paradigm, then you got to be a little bit skeptical if no one that doesn't support that political paradigm is able to independently validate that data and that evidence. Now, evaluating the source, you want to look at the credentials of the source. Is it a random person's blog? You know, I've had people send me a blog entry by a random person making these outrageous claims that more or less, discount all of the scientific research in a field. And they're like, but this person, this is where it's published on the web. Well, anyone can put anything on the web, and it doesn't mean that it has credibility. If it's a publication with a reputation to lose if they lie, then there's more credibility there, right? If it's like a major news source whose audience really values the truth, which not all major news sources audiences do value the truth. Some major news sources audiences want to be told that their beliefs are the right beliefs, rather than to seek truth. But if it's a reputable source, then it'll probably show up in Media Bias Fact Check, which is a great tool. By the way, I should share this presentation because I have a bunch of links. If you go to Media Bias Fact Check, you can take any significant media source and check whether or not it has whether or not it's a credible source of information, and whether or not it has a political bias, and how credible and how much bias it has in which direction. So highly recommend looking at mediabiasfactcheck.com. When you get data from a source and it sounds surprising, check it out on Media Bias Fact Check. If they're biased, then they have a low reputation for quality. Chances are good that what you're reading is not actually true. It's just something that was made up to further their political biases. If you talk about understanding the source's purpose and audience, you want to understand what's the goal of the source. Like, what are their aims? Like, what are they trying to do? Are they trying to persuade you? If they are a politically biased source, they're probably trying to persuade you in their political beliefs. Although not all politically biased sources are. Some are just sharing the perspectives of that political perspective. What I found in fact checking left, right, and center news is that left and right don't share any facts that support the opposite side, even if it's true. And the centrist news doesn't share any facts that might make it seem might make it seem biased towards the left or the right. And so the centrist news won't share the things that left and right will share that actually is true. And then one of the two, and I won't say which two, tends to make stuff up that furthers its political beliefs, and you guys can fact check both left and right and see which one for yourself you think makes stuff up. And then Wikipedia has been shown to be as accurate as Encyclopedia Britannica for pages that have a lot of traffic. Fringe pages could be very inaccurate. They're user editable. I've known people that added pages to Wikipedia that were ridiculous and like their own inside jokes and stuff. So there is stuff that's very inaccurate, but it's also very irrelevant stuff that no one cares about and no one would ever look at unless they were the friend of this person who added that thing to Wikipedia. So Encyclopedia Britannica and Wikipedia are both credible sources. So people who discount Wikipedia don't understand that it's been scientifically validated as very accurate. Recognizing potential conflicts of interest. I talked about that already, so I'm not going to cover that again. So assessing the evidence quality, you want to look at relevance, like how relevant is the information about the question you're trying to answer? How accurate is the source as far as reliability? Is it a current source? If you're talking about computer technologies and it's 5 to 10 years old, it's probably not relevant anymore because technology in the computer industry changes so fast that 5 to 10 years old isn't relevant. Same with like modern politics. If you read a news source about like that about a country that has gone through a lot of political change and it's no longer a current source, then it's probably not relevant anymore. You also want to look at reputability and credibility of the source and what's the purpose of the information and why it was created. and this is called RACAP, relevance, accuracy, currency, authority, and purpose. And then I also want to highlight the importance of peer-reviewed research. This is scientific studies that people gather to create repeatable experiments. This is how we've made so much progress since the Enlightenment in the world, is through scientific research. Scholar.google.com is a great way to search peer-reviewed research topics, and you can get a summary of the peer-reviewed research. And by the way, I'll put the presentation in the chat. You know, you can look up studies about any topic that studies have been written about and get an abstract. You can't get all of the details of the studies because that's behind a paywall. And unfortunately, even though to me, research should be open to everybody, it's often the details of scientific research is locked behind paywalls that only academics get access to, which I am not a big fan of, but it is the way that the world works today. But at least scholar.google.com can get you the Cliffs Notes version of that research, and you can learn something significant from that. And you can, you know, sometimes get access through the library to the actual studies themselves, if you want to get to that level of detail, which I would encourage people to do. So let's talk now about evidence from unconventional sources. What do I mean by unconventional sources? So social media posts, blog articles, forum threads, user-generated content. These are increasingly common ways for people to get information today. QAnon is like an unconventional source of information. For those not familiar, this is the you know, the guy named Q, the anonymous person that you know, sort of would leak information that was sort of conspiracy theory type ideas that are actually very mainstream. I shouldn't call them conspiracy theory because they're, according to some media outlets, QAnon is believed by half of Republicans. It's a Republican-leaning group, QAnon. You know, some things that you want to do when you're dealing with these informal sources, which, by the way, this is where studies have shown that fake news travels faster than real news. And part of my goal of teaching this stuff today is to help people slow down. And when you see something that sounds outrageous or incredible, instead of just saying, oh my God, I have to share this with everyone, follow some of the steps that we talk about here. Look at who the source is. Is it a subject matter expert? Is it an authority? And I'm not a fan of only trusting authorities. Like, some other people can have inside intel and valuable information. Just because someone's not authority doesn't mean that they don't have valuable information. But, you know, are they even in a position to know about whatever subject they're talking about? Do they have a credible way of getting the information that they claim to understand and know? And have they explained to you how they came about that information? You know, it's very common for people to basically spread lies and share those lies in order to further their confirmation bias and their political beliefs. And we have to be vigilant not to share that information and reshare that information, because fake news spreading faster than real news is a real problem. Because all of us, you know, I think have an inherent desire to know the truth and to be in tune with the truth. And I think even the people spreading fake news, and even the ones making up fake news, think that they're spreading the truth in some way. They may consider themselves lying and sharing that lie, but they think they're doing it to further a more positive, like, end result. And so I'm an eternal optimist, and I think everyone has the best of intentions, but I think that sometimes people's confirmation bias can get them to do things that they themselves know are unethical, like spreading fake news and spreading lies. But they think they do it in the service of a greater good, and that's a misunderstanding, in my opinion. So you want to check the accuracy of things that sound outrageous. Look for factual errors, exaggerations, misrepresentations. cross-verify from other sources that are more reliable and see whether or not you can back up those claims that you're reading that sound outrageous. If you can't, it's probably not true. You want to look for the bias. You know, I've seen things posted from people's Facebook pages and then gone to their Facebook page, and then I see other things that they've posted and I'm like, oh, this person has a very clear political bias. And, you know, the chances are good that they're spreading things that just further their political bias rather than that they're trying to share actual truths. And again, I think they do it in the service of they believe in their political beliefs so strongly that they're willing to lie for them. But I would argue that, you know, the beliefs worth believing in don't require us to lie about them. If a belief is worth believing in, it won't, you know, that belief won't ask us to lie, and people who actually have good intentions won't ask us to lie in the furtherance of that belief. Next is relevance and context, and so you want to look at whether or not the information is relevant to what you're trying to understand, and what's the context in which it was presented. I talked a little bit about that just a moment ago. And then current is how current is it, and then review comments and feedbacks. Like there are a lot of people will, when misinformation is presented, I do think that all of us have a desire to seek truth. And if someone sees misinformation, there will often be in the comments people pointing out why it's misinformation. And so, you know, it's good to look at comments and see what people say. And I do that in reviews of products as well, as like, who are the people that liked it? Who are the people that didn't? And what do they say about it? And, you know, what holds up to scrutiny. So consistency of evidence, you want to see whether or not all the evidence around a particular subject is consistent. If all of the evidence is consistently sending you the same message, well, then you have a pretty good sense that that's probably the right answer. Now, if there's one piece of data that's, you know, not aligned with the rest, and it comes from a politically biased source about, you know, data where its position is furthering its political bias, well, then that one piece of data is pretty skeptical, or even a small number of data. If the only like data going against the current of independent and, you know, choose right or left, whichever side, you know, it's supporting, and independents align, but then the other side doesn't agree, well, then probably it's political bias getting in the way there. And you need to recognize those biases are out there and really highly influential in what people share and what people say in the first place. So you also want to make sure that the evidence supports the claims. You know, that example that I gave about you know, organic food causing autism, right? You know, once we talked about it, yeah, clearly organic food doesn't cause autism, or autism would have been going through the roof for the last 5,000 years, or like, you know, since man started being a farmer, right? Because organic food has existed since man started farming. So why would autism suddenly spike when GMOs were introduced? So, you know, the evidence supporting the claims is important, and you want to make sure that the evidence supports the acquisition of knowledge and wisdom, which should be the end goals of evidence evaluation and the evidence that you gather. All right, so that's the end of the presentation. With that said, I would love comments, and I am not able to follow comments while I'm presenting, so I apologize if people are writing stuff in the chat. I won't be able to see it, so just raise your hand and I will start calling on people. But I would also love feedback in the chat about whether or not this was helpful, whether you learned anything, for people willing to share. Thank you, Alfie, for saying that I need to give access. I will do that momentarily, and I'll let you know when it's done. So that said, Yaqib, I'm going to let you go first, and I will give access to the presentation now.
Thank you for the presentation. I had a question about something that you said before the presentation started. I don't know if I misheard you or something like that. Did you say that you thought there was scientific evidence of reincarnation?
So there is, if you Google, there are a lot of peer-reviewed studies on reincarnation. If you Google scientific evidence for reincarnation, you'll see article after article written that science has more or less validated reincarnation exists in peer-reviewed studies that are reproducible, that have been reproduced by skeptics. There have been so many studies that there have been meta-studies done for it. I know it sounds crazy. I thought it was crazy too until like I started Googling it, and there's very
So
good.
do you believe that?
Yeah, in fact, I had an a priori argument supporting reincarnation before I read the evidence. But I definitely didn't know that it was studied. I always said, someday I want to run scientific studies on this to see whether or not it's true. But turns out it's already been studied and it's incontroversial at this point. The only people that think it's controversial are the ones that haven't looked up the science of it. So
I have interesting stuff to say about that later, but I'll let other people ask questions.
Yeah, I mean, that's not tonight's topic, so I don't want to go too much into detail on reincarnation. I brought it up as an aside, not so much as for the topic for tonight. We want to talk about evidence evaluation tonight, but come to the online community and let's talk about it there. And we can go back and forth about, what alternate opinions you have, and we can talk about it. And I would encourage you, though, to read the research on the topic before you come to a conclusion. That said, Katie, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I loved your presentation. It really got me thinking. And I agree with you that people think they're doing good when they're furthering their beliefs, and that could include lies. And my point on on reporting the facts, I'm not. I think if you have a bias, I would say that you need both. You need people that are kind of insiders and outsiders observing on the same thing. So if there you have like two sides like entrenched in a conflict, whatever the conflict is, you would want to have kind of both, the insider insight, and then you'd want to have people also from the outside fact checking, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do think that it's important. I'll be right back on video. I do think it's important to have people with various biases fact checking. So that's, we did that when, before the war in the Ukraine happened, we looked up the situation, and we looked it up from right-wing news sources, left-wing news sources, and centrist news sources. And I really encourage people to, if you don't have friends with the opposite political perspectives as you, make friends like that are polite, and that you can have a polite conversation about these things. And, when it comes to a current political topic, both do your research and then share what you learn and look for independent sources that validate the surprising facts. And you'd be surprised at how much you can learn from that kind of exercise. I think there's a ton to be learned from hearing the perspective with an open mind of people who have different opinions from you, which I think is what you're saying, Katie, if I didn't understand wrong.
Yes, that could help too if you're discussing it together and reviewing the facts together.
Yeah, great. So thank you, Katie. And Remco, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Garrett. Well done, mate. It's a good structured presentation. I thought you brought over some powerful points. I think one of the ones that I immediately engaged where you were saying, and it's the access to information, and you talked about paywalls, and yes, indeed. I mean, the fact that quality information is often behind paywalls is a real problem. It's where you would think that the government should step in and release that information so we had direct access to it. Good point. But my concern is that even if you got past a paywall, the question is, could you understand it? Right. And it's often written in very obscure language. It's written for their peers. It's difficult. Furthermore, and in particular, can you bring it into context? And for me, the biggest issue about information and being able to relate to it is context. Because what has happened in this world, we're becoming so specialized that everybody's pulling out their microscopes and writing a tome about their issues. But can we contextualize it? Can we give it meaning? Can we create relevance? So, for example, when you talk about QAnon, and I mean, I may be jumping all over the place, but perhaps you might pick up the string from what I'm trying to say. You talk about QAnon and how it's false. But I would suggest, and perhaps I've been radicalized by Wittgenstein, and you might remember I did an intro. No small point. QAnon is communicating. These people, even if you dismiss them and say, this is utter bullshit, even if you say that, I would suggest that they're still communicating something. And we're just not hearing it.
Yes.
We are not hearing what is underneath it all. They may not even be themselves be aware of what they're communicating. So, that again comes context. And just to conclude, in terms of context, there was a very famous event in history that I choked on when I was a science student, and was the Galileo affair. And have you guys heard of the Galileo affair? Well, it was Galileo, and he was put under house arrest by the Pope. And why? Why? Because he affirmed what Copernicus had suggested. That is, we now have that the sun is at the center of our solar system. And I used to think, this is the religious system exerting its power. However, and again, on the theme of context, and I'll conclude with that, Garrett, I'm being a bit long, I'm sorry. A very respected philosopher of science, and no, not Karl Popper, but Paul Feyerabend. And I think he was in California, he's one of the respected philosophers of science. And he said that what the Pope did was perfectly rational to deny what we would look at as the truth. He was being more rational than Galileo. And, this is about perspective of the time. And I choked on that for years. And then I read Paul Feyerabend, and I thought, maybe he's got a point. So anyway, I think when I conclude and say, look, information is extremely complex, and it's very hard to create a perspective on it sometimes. And thank you for the opportunity to share that with you.
Thanks, Remco. And yeah, I'm going to remind people, and I guess it's not a reminder, but I forgot to say it before I went into questions, is if people can focus each hand raise on one comment or one question at a time, only because it takes a long time otherwise to reply to everything. I'm going to try to go to Remco's really quickly. But yeah, I think, government, it would be lovely to have them step in and get people behind the paywalls. But I agree with you, Remco, that not everyone would understand the studies, but I will say ChatGPT might go a long way in helping someone understand the studies. If people knew to copy and paste from a study into ChatGPT and ask for summaries, I bet it would do pretty well. It's done some pretty incredible stuff like that for me for code, and I bet it could decode a study as well as code. And then the other thing is, I do think the context of the study is important. But I would say that your point about QAnon is the one that I think is the most important, which is that even if you think that all of the QAnon stuff is a conspiracy theory, there's still something to be learned from the fact that so many people believe it. And I agree with you completely, which is why we held an event on, why so many people, how did Trump become president? A lot of people were very surprised by that election. And how did it happen, and why do so many people support Trump, and why do so many people support QAnon? And I actually had an interesting conversation with someone about the QAnon conspiracy, which, for those that don't know, the primary conspiracy of QAnon is that all Democratic leaders are cannibal pedophiles. And I said, well, that sounds pretty incredible claim. And then their response to me was, but Garrett, Jeffrey Epstein was a well-known pedophile who played with members of both parties in government, and he quote unquote committed suicide in jail. And I'm like, yeah, actually that's a pretty good point. So maybe there actually are significant pedophiles in government, and that one, the cannibal thing, I think is a pretty far hard argument to make, but the pedophile one, there may be some evidence for. So that said, but that's also across both sides of the aisle. But that said, I want to let Michael go. Always look forward to hearing what you have to say, just like Remco and all of our regulars. So Michael, what do you have on your mind?
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. Good presentation.
Thank you.
I hope you have a ton of time, not for me, but I was just looking at the chat. There's a lot of misinformation there that really someone needs to talk to. I would say I'm well knowledgeable in that space, and maybe I could add just a couple of things there. But a primary point, one, I want to tighten up your definition of the statistics. So as far as I'm aware, I do have very scientific background. As far as I'm aware, there are only two types of statistics that is acceptable as an evidence. One is double-blind studies, that the difference between the blind and the unblind study are statistically sufficiently significant. Then at that point, you could accept that as an evidence. And then the second category is the cause and effect of a statistically significant experiments that have been conducted. So those are the only two categories that are acceptable in the field of science that I'm aware of. There may be others. So just because two events or two even very large data samples are highly correlated, it does not indicate that there is a cause and effect in place. So number one. Number two, Samko, I believe, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, sir, mentioned that if the data and the evidence comes out from behind the firewall, behind the paywall, you may not understand it, or would you even understand the context, etc. I agreed with a lot of things you said, but the point isn't whether you understand it or not. The point is someone will, and that's what's valuable. The assumption, the underlying assumption has to be, one, we all agree on a method of evaluating evidence. If we don't understand that, we end up getting swayed by misinformation. And unfortunately, I would lean towards probably 85 to 90% of the population don't really understand evidence, period. So the point isn't whether the data comes and the evidence comes out from behind the paywalls. It must. We would like it to. But the question isn't whether you would understand it or I would understand it. The point is someone will, and that's in fact the purpose of the peer-reviewed journals. In the field of science, in any field of real science, basic physics, basic chemistry, and math is questionable, and some people call it a science and some people call it a language of science. But those two fields primarily, and the engineering versions of those two, anything that is published in publicly refereed journals for the sole purpose of, I may not understand the chemistry, but I certainly understand the physics much better than many others. So I can review that and then submit a response if I don't agree with it. And then the third subject was that I saw a lot of misinformation about Kennedy as well as COVID in the chat. Just a couple of basic things that I'm going to mention. One regarding Kennedy, this new candidate. I'm not a supporter of him, but directly watch his interviews. Do not rely on the left or the right telling you what he believes.
We're getting into more topics per conversation.
Yeah, we really want to stick with one, and I'm sorry to hold you to that, Michael, but we really, I don't remember, and I'm trying to take notes, Michael, and I don't remember half of what you said to try to even respond to it. So I appreciate everything you said, and I liked hearing it, but we want to try to keep to one topic at a time if we can.
Yeah, that's why I said this is a very, very good presentation and very, very good meeting. And it really requires a lot of time because assuming only 1 to 2 people are critical thinkers,
right,
out of 10 of us, 8 that are not. So
right.
there's going to be a lot of disinformation in this group as we speak.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is what's in the chat rather than what I presented. Is that right, Michael?
Exactly. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I was exactly referring to that.
Sorry, at first I thought you meant my presentation. I was like, I'm open to feedback, Michael. Like if you have feedback about my presentation, we'll talk about it offline. And if you do, that's open to everybody. That I always welcome feedback too. But I did see a bunch of stuff in the chat that I understand why you're saying that. You know, we don't lock down the chat, so everyone's allowed to say anything they want. I do think that, you know, I want to encourage everyone to pay attention to these critical thinking lectures because they'll help us all better understand how to see the truth more clearly and for ourselves, which ultimately, you know, we have what we call the 5 intentions of the Free Thinker Institute, which is to transparently, you know, to be the best version of ourselves, seek truth, and to be fair. And that's our North Star. And then we want to transparently share our beliefs, which people are doing in the chat. But we also want to listen with an open mind to when other people share reasons that our current beliefs may be wrong. And we want to improve our critical thinking skills so we can discern what's fact and fiction and wisdom from folly more effectively. And that's what these 2 months of critical thinking are about. And doing that helps us rely on our own judgment so that when we increase happiness and decrease harm, as Katie mentioned, she agreed with me that I think everybody has good intentions. And it was the ancient Greeks that said, no man sees himself as a bad man. They only talked about men because they were totally misogynistic, but no person sees himself as a bad person. Let me be politically correct. We all, you know, have good intentions. We just have misunderstandings that cause us to, you know, do bad things when we think we're doing good things. And so critical thinking skills help us be, you know, even keeled so that we can make better decisions to increase happiness and decrease harm. And that said, I want to go ahead.
I apologize. There's one point I need to make in reference to some of the chat, some of the comments in the chat. There is a very large body of evidence published in the publicly refereed journals regarding the side effects, statistics, lots of very good information that's only being published in a few countries. One is in Korea and one is in a couple of Scandinavian countries. I suggest before reaching any type of conclusion, either read those yourselves or rely on people that actually have the background and do read them. Why did I say this? Primarily because this is really has been a very dividing issue. And there's a lot of this information. If we just assume only 1 to 2 people out of 10 are critical thinkers, that means out of the 20 of us here, only 2 to 4 are, and the remaining are not. That doesn't mean we're a bad person. I'm a bad person if I'm not a critical thinker, but it just means I'm making mistakes and I need to either spend the time, read the journals that are only coming out in only a few countries. They're not coming out in UK, in Germany, in US, or many of these countries. The point is, it was an important subject that I thought to mention. Look for a good source of data and then make your mind.
Thank you for that. And you know, go ahead.
Garrett, I'm after Stephanie.
So after Stephanie is Rose, and then you.
My hand expired.
The hand doesn't expire, but if you put it down by accident, then I can go to you after Stephanie. Just remember not to put it down, and but I'll try to put you after Stephanie. So Stephanie, your turn. You're on mute, Stephanie.
Mute. Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks for the presentation. And since this is the second one, you may have touched on this. I know we're doing critical thinking in a, I hope, good attempt to arrive at objective reality. But I'd like to know, unless you covered it in the last lecture, how you define objective reality, since clearly a lot of people are disagreeing. Who decides what is objective reality?
So that's a great question, Stephanie. I try very hard not to tell people what is objective reality, other than to say that I try to help people understand for themselves how to determine what's objective reality and what's not. But in terms of the way that I see it, objective reality is facts about the world that we live in. So one that's fairly uncontroversial, but 300,000 Americans will disagree with me. Earth is an oblate spheroid, which means we're sort of spherical. It's the technical term for what Earth is. And it's not flat, although over 300,000 Americans think that Earth is flat. But I would argue that objective reality means it is true that objective reality is that Earth is an oblate spheroid, hurtling through space around the sun, and we, like cold hard facts that are objectively verifiable. And there was a good news article about flat earthers spend $40,000 to prove that Earth is flat and end up proving themselves wrong. And I wish more flat earthers would do that. And I wish more people would do that, is spend their own time and resources to try to prove themselves right, and then be open to the fact that they may prove themselves wrong. But ultimately, what we try to do in the Free Thinker Institute is teach people the critical thinking skills so that each one of us can discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly, and what is objective truth for ourselves. For me, something that's objective truth is something that's, believable and validated by people who don't have a bias to lie to me. If, the used car salesman tells me this car, and I gave this example last week. I was buying a used car, and the car, like when I put the brakes on going about 40 miles an hour, the car shuddered. And I was like, that's odd. And the guy goes, oh, the brakes are just rusty. That'll come off within a few weeks of you buying the car, right? And after I buy the car, I'm already committed. Well, this guy's best interest is to just sell me whatever the worst car is that he can get off his hands. And I knew that. And so I said, well, let me research this. I went home and I test drove a couple of other cars. I went home and researched it, and that model and that year had that problem where the brakes stuttered, and it was a known issue that other people had reported, across, doing research from independent sources. And so, Stephanie, my answer to you about what is objective reality, it's the truth from people who have no bias towards, lying to you, or is independently validated by people who are either saying something that is not in their best interest, or saying something that is not in their, basically telling you things that is not in their best interest to tell you, or where they have no stake in the game and they're just sharing the truth to share the truth, which I think ultimately we all have an inherent desire to do. Does that answer your question, Stephanie? Sorry, it was a little long.
No, I think so. I mean, you picked pretty obvious examples. The hard ones are the controversial ones, but I mean, I do get what you're saying.
Yeah, and I want to not alienate anyone, but I do take cold, hard, fast stands when we have a topic of the evening, Stephanie. So you'll see that we covered gun control, we covered abortion, we've covered some very controversial subjects, and you'll hear my answers on like what I think is objective reality on those topics. But in general, I try not to give political opinions without the time and the time to be able to justify them to the audience that I'm sharing them with, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So Yakub said that he had his hand up before you, Rose. I'm sorry, I'm going to trust him because I always trust first. And so Yakub, go ahead, and then we'll go to Rose next.
Yeah, sorry. I noticed that like if I have my hand up and like I cough, the thing like moves the hand down because it assumes that I was talking. So I figured
That's
that out.
weird. Interesting. Maybe put yourself on mute. And
Yeah, I
that
figured
might
that
solve
out.
that problem for the next time.
Okay.
Thanks for letting me know that happens. I didn't know about that.
Okay, I noticed that earlier. So I really like the presentation, and there's so much for me to say, but I don't know if this is gonna take too much of your time. But do you believe in parapsychology?
What is parapsychology? I don't know what it is.
So like some people like Dean Radin, who believe in parapsychology, try to like test telepathy from people, like if they can guess what's in another person's mind, like by showing one person in a room like 2 cards of 4, for example, out of a deck of poker deck, and then they close another person in another room, and then they check to see if that person predicted it correctly.
Can I speak to, we're going to try to stay on topic with what Garrett's talking about now. That's an interesting thing, Yakub. But
I
with
think
a lot of people wanting to discuss the current topic, I think it's best if we stick to that.
Michael, you're a great moderator. I really appreciate that, because I was about to just delve into it, but you're actually right. And Michael's doing a better job of moderating than me. So thank you, Michael. Yakub, I do think Michael's right. Like, let's add that as a topic, because that's a whole nother topic for another night. And let's talk about it in the online community. And if people want to talk about it for an evening, we'll do that.
So can you share the link to that?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. I will share the links to, it's a bunch of links, and the one to the website has a very prominent link to the online community, and I'm also sharing the link to the online community as well. So, which is through Discord. For those that don't know, we use Discord for our online community. But that said, let's let Rose go next.
Hi, Garrett. Thank you so much. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Few things that I just wanted to say very quick. One was that as far as being biased, I think some people are more biased. And the reason for that is just like when we see something, we are, as human beings, we have been conditioned and designed to avoid danger. So as soon as we see somebody, we judge that person just by the look. That's one thing. The same thing is that when we read something, so we tend to quickly judge and decide which way we want to go to. And this comes just to protect us. This is for protection. I think those who are more flexible to, flexible minded, not to, accept anything as 100% facts, they can be more successful, because it depends, for example, in media, it depends which media comes first to you and which information you get first. So if you get, for example, the left side first, you tend to believe that they are right. If you get the right side first, you tend to believe that that one is right. So something should counterpart it to, to make it balance. So the most important thing, I think, for critical thinking is, and as you mentioned, evidence, is that we should have the flexibility, and we shouldn't come up to any judgment before we have all the evidence, we have all the sides considered. That's one thing. The other thing that I just wanted to quickly and respectfully disagree is that you and another participant mentioned that you believe that nobody's intending to harm when they say something or they present something wrongly, and it's, I could say many times this is the case, but also there are times that some people get benefit out of it, and they present it, they exactly know that that's not the truth, and they present it in different way because they get some benefit out of it. And we have to realize that this is not whatever we are doing the research and we're understanding is not about that person, it's about the topic. So we are not focusing, okay, if this person who is saying this or presenting this, is he reliable or not? We just have to know that the topic, if what he is saying is the fact or not, not if that person is right, if that person is a good, reliable person or not. So a bad person might have say something which is very true. A good person might say something which is not very true, as you said, because that person core belief is not the truth. So if your core belief is that the sky is purple, when you say it is purple, you didn't lie, but it's not the truth. So that was my take on it.
Yeah, really great points. You gave a lot of. Please, guys, keep to one thing. Just you can raise your hand more than once, and we'll go through them quickly. But let me try to address everything. I agree. Some people are more biased than others, and people are conditioned to avoid danger. But I would argue that we should still judge people as individuals. And I've had people say, well, Black people cause more crime, so it's okay for me to be afraid of Black people. Well, the people who told me that were not Black, and actually most Black crime is Black on Black crime. So actually that person is not any more at risk from a Black person than they would be for a white person. They might be actually lower at risk. And so there are a lot of misunderstandings even in that. And so yes, we all have our biases, but we have to check those biases and try to look for objective evidence and look for the story behind the story, because that's where the real truth is held. I love what you said about don't accept anything as 100% fact. Rose, I don't, and I don't encourage anyone to. That's why intention number 2 is to always have an open mind that anything we currently believe is wrong. I like to say when you accept you're wrong with good judgment, you're actually immediately right again. You're just more right than you were before. So it's fine to be wrong, because as soon as you're wrong, you're actually more right than you were when you were wrong. The only time you're really wrong is when it's clear you're wrong and you refuse to admit it because of egotism, which is the thing that prevents us from admitting we're wrong because of confirmation bias. And so I agree with you. We shouldn't accept anything as 100% fact, and I don't even accept that I exist as 100% fact. I might be a figment of my own imagination. Who knows? Like the world, crazier things might have happened. So, and
that's the beauty of philosophy, because in philosophy you see like different when you study philosophy or you have this discussion about philosophy, do you see different aspects and different things? That's the beauty of it, I think.
It is. Seeing different perspectives is so valuable, and that's what we try to do in the FTI, is expose people to very different opinions. And I don't like even saying, and I tried to explain, like even QAnon, like even though I think that it's very unlikely that all Democratic leaders are cannibals, like maybe they are. And if someone could introduce to me evidence from an unbiased source that validates that, I would listen to them. Like I'm not like closed-minded. And I think we should all listen with an open mind to what people present, because that's how we learn new truths. But there's also a limit. I spent 40 minutes debating with a flat earther. I'm not going to debate that anymore. So we also have to pick and choose which things we want to be open-minded to. So I'm not saying we should all be open-minded to absolutely everything, but definitely erring on the side of having an open mind is good. And then I think your point about people psychologically believe the first story they hear is super important, that everybody in this group should listen to what you said and take it to heart, that when you have two people tell you two opposing stories and one told you first, you will have a bias towards believing the first person who told you whatever story that was, even if it's less credible, it's less likely to be true, and it's far more far-fetched. People have a psychological, proclivity to believe the first story that they hear. And we need to be sure not to fall into that. And that's what confirmation bias is we heard that story first, so we believed it. And we would rather believe that that's the true story rather than the new story we're hearing, which may be more credible. So I think those are super important. And as far as your respectful disagreement. I don't think actually we disagreed. I gave an example of what you said, which was my used car salesman who said, Garrett, that car is just fine, right? And he was lying to me. He knew he was lying to me. There's no way that that guy didn't know he was lying to me. All I would say is, in his mind, he said, it's more important that I make my commission, and I'm a good person for making my commission, rather than I'm a good person for being honest with the person I'm selling the car to. So he has convinced himself that lying is the right thing to do and what makes him a good person. And I don't think he is saying, I'm going to be a jerk and just screw over this guy. He's saying it's more important that I need to make a living and I need to pay my bills, and I'm willing to lie to pay my bills. And so he did. And so I don't think anyone intentionally is trying to be evil and bad. It's just that people rationalize and justify doing bad things, thinking that that's the right thing to do because they justify it in their minds. Does that make sense, Rose, as a distinction?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you said, even like criminals and the serial killers, they have a reason, and they have a way to convince others and themselves that, you know, they're doing the right thing. They definitely think that they are doing the right thing.
Right.
It's just this is not the right thing, but that's how they believe that it is the right thing.
And that's why we're teaching critical thinking skills, so they can better discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly. So and hopefully we can get these up on YouTube so more people can learn better critical thinking skills and learn how to make better decisions. So thank you so much for the great comments, Rose. Remco, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. I opened up talking, picking up your point about paywalls, and was it Michael M? Yes, two Michaels here. Sort of questioned me a little on that, and you know, I do have a concern that information is not in the public domain, so that we can make more informed decisions. And I think my second point was: is it clear? Can we understand it? And even then, I still have to say, yeah, but can we do anything with that? Because, you know, I think the thing that we're missing is that we're so inclined to claim to feel we're informed, and some say, look, I've done my research, which, by the way, is the line of QAnon, as you probably know.
Yep.
Can we know? If we do all the research, can we really know what is actually behind it? In other words, can we create perspective? I question that in this increasingly complex world. What is the point of trying to understand when the world is so incredibly complex and diverse that you just can't assemble an overview from microscopic bits of information? And that is my concern. And I think at the same time, what is happening, and I think this is what I'm leading to, is the value of having an institute, Garrett, because I, as an individual, can't build up an overview of the situation. I can do all the reading, but you know, in the end, you need more than one person. And in this world, what is happening, unfortunately, there is a reduction in trust. That's well documented, it's universal, and there is a reduction in trust. In other words, we don't trust the institutions, the sources of the information anymore. And in that void, we've got all the rat bags coming up. So I think all I'm going to say is, in the end, what we need is an authority, a collective authority where some of the big minds can come together and evaluate things and then speak to the public. Because otherwise, as a trusted entity, because otherwise we'll have a continuation of what has been happening. And you know, like, for example, under COVID, I mean, that was a classic expression, you know, looking at the massive death rate in the United States. That was largely due to mistrust. And I think I might have mentioned 900,000 Americans died through not trusting the institutions. I mean, that's a big jump. That's all I'm going to say. Trust, and yeah, lack of trust.
Yeah, no, I think lack of trust is rife these days, and I'm glad you're bringing it up, because that's why I actually learned like this concept from the Buddha, where one of the quotes from the Buddha is, you shouldn't believe anything you read, you know, in your religious texts or are taught by your religious teachers, including what I teach myself. This is the Buddha saying this. You should only believe it if you believe it to be true of your own, you know, judgment. And I'm like, wow, that's what I want to do and say. Like, that's like my idol. He's one of my idols, the Buddha. And so that's what we do in the Free Thinker Institute too, is we want to teach people not only to trust themselves, but also to have the tools to be able to trust themselves in a world of misinformation, where there's, you know, someone commented in the chat. I can't read most of the chat, but I did notice someone commented on misinformation versus disinformation. And there's so much misunderstanding being spread with this whole advent of social media, where, you know, it's no longer trusted authorities that have a reputation to lose that are sharing information, but it's everybody has a mouthpiece. And, you know, like, someone just because of the way they look could have 1 million followers and literally have nothing of value to say and nothing true to say, but they still, because of how they look, have 1 million followers and now have a huge mouthpiece. Like, this is the world we live in, and we need to be equipped for it. And to be equipped for it, we need critical thinking skills to discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly. And so that's why we have this series. So thank you for your points, Remco. Appreciate that. And Rose, by the way, your hand's still up. If you don't mind, actually, I'll put it down for you if you don't mind. And then Anna, go ahead. Good to see you.
Just a quick comment on what Jakob said about his hand being lowered. I too had the same problem over Sunday. To me, I was in the habit of unmuting myself, you know, when I was the next person in line, and this little blurb comes up and says, your hand has been up for over 5 seconds and you haven't said anything, or words to that effect, so we're going to lower it for you. So there's a little bit of a glitch somewhere in the programming or my use of it. That's all.
Great. Thanks, Anna. Well, you know, it's Zoom is you know, you know, a good tool, but not a perfect tool. So sorry if there are glitches with it. Mr. The Milo. Thank you, Anna, for your comment.
Hey there, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So there's a million really interesting points that have been made, and I could go off on 1,000 tangents, but I'm gonna keep it down to just this one question
Keep the one,
I
if you
had.
could. One per hand raise. You can raise your hand as many times as you want, but one per hand raise if you could.
So it seems, and I guess my question is looking for clarification, or if I'm on the right track or not here. When I'm looking at the different steps of practical critical thinking, you gather your sources, you assess and whatnot. When it comes to assessing, it looks like what you're looking for is, or what I would think you're looking for is subtractive. You're looking for things that say don't trust this guy as opposed to things that say do trust. Because for example, like my aunt told me, you know, you'll never be able to find an apartment for under $800 a month, and you should trust me instead of, you know, the people in your Reddit community or whatever saying, you know, because I love you is what she's saying. So there's this positive attribute, and you know, but what I'm hearing, and I might be on the wrong track, is that what you should look for is not the positives but the negatives. Look for the red flags, not the green flags, because then you get into the arguments like, oh well, we've done this for this amount of time, or oh well, this is such a big organization, how could they be wrong? So am I on the right track there, or
So I don't necessarily think so.
Am I missing something?
I don't think you're missing anything. I think what I said is that if something sounds very surprising, then you should fact check it, because the misinformation is generally very surprising stuff. And when I try to fact check the things that sound very surprising, they always turn out to not be true. And so that was more what I was trying to get at. But I would view everything with a healthy set of skepticism and, cast your net widely in terms of, she probably does love you and she probably believed that you couldn't get anything for under 800 a month. Like, again, I don't think she had bad intentions, but she may not have understood what Reddit is capable of and the fact that you can actually find a safe place to live for less than that, in certain areas. And so, like knowing, having, casting a wide net and looking at information from a wide variety of sources and creating a wide network of people in your friend network is really important. And that's part of what we try to do in the FTI with members, is have people from diverse backgrounds, political, ethnic, across all strata. But, like how, if you have a very diverse set of information sources, which is what we were talking about tonight, then you're going to have a very diverse set of data to work off of. And your view of objective reality, right, which is apartment values and rental prices, is wider than just if you had simply trusted your aunt, I think it was you said. And so great, good for you, man. Like, good for you using the resources you have available. And if you found a safe place to live for under 800 a month, that's a deal. When I lived in Kansas City, it was a long time ago, but I had a 2-bedroom apartment for $650 a month in like a beautiful part of town modeled after southern Spain. It was gorgeous. In Manhattan, that would probably be not possible, but like there are, having a wide network and wide set of data sources creates possibilities that would otherwise not be possible. Jose, bienvenidos. Good to see you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that maybe a practical use for the topic is typically the times I found myself wanting to understand better a certain topic that could vary from us buying a car to buying or getting a mortgage, or something that affects you directly, and also health related, which is a little more difficult because cars are cars, our numbers are dollars and our card, right? But in medical issues, you need to have some expertise in order to understand and to find information. So what I found very useful for me is that I listen to the opposing views. So instead of doing all the research that would be required for a good assessment, I say, okay, I'm going to listen to the views of the doctors that are supporting one point and the view of the doctors who are against that point. And then I listen not to what they say, but I listen to their support arguments, right? They all make claims, they all make arguments. And I pick the one that has made the case. In other words, that has provided more support for all their arguments, have better suppositions, better premises, and it reaches a different conclusions. In other words, you create yourself a debate, right? If it's not a direct debate, which used to happen more often in the past, and you see that more in the academia, then you create a debate. You find information about the Ukraine-Russia conflict from different sources, and then you go to the Eastern Oriental side of the world and try to get information from Russian sources and other sources. And you listen to the arguments. Who's making the best argument about what's going on? And then you make up your own mind. You cannot make up your mind based on the claims. You can only attempt to do that once you listen to the arguments and supporting evidence that they provide, right? Because it will be insurmountable, the amount of work, unless you're in academia, you're a professor, or you're writing a report, or you're an investigative journalist. For a common person that wants to know more about a subject and make a decision, I mean, it will be almost insurmountable to gather yourself all the sources that you can and try to make that assessment. Unless somebody will pay me for that, I would rather listen to the experts, few of them, by the way, with the opposing views. If they all have the same views, you haven't gained anything. You have to find your opposing views, and then you analyze the support for their arguments, and then you make your own decision, like the Buddha said. That's all. Just a thought about practically use of this.
Thank you, Jose. Great comments as always. And I think that's kind of what I was trying to say by saying, like, look at the right, the left, and the center, is look at the opposing viewpoints and see who has the best argument. And that's really why we're having this series on critical thinking, because what you just described, Jose, is putting all of the 2 months of lectures together in a comprehensive way that says, look at the evidence, evaluate the evidence that's credible, then use logical logical conclusions to see which evidence can come to, which credible evidence can create what conclusions, and which perspectives are offering those well-founded conclusions. And those are the things you believe. And that's you, Jose, using critical thinking skills to great effect to help your health. And that's what I want everyone to be able to do. And I'm glad you're able to do it. And it doesn't surprise me because I've heard your comments from other events, but that's what I want everybody to be able to do. And that's why, like, people were saying only 10 to 20% of the US are critical thinkers. It's not, by the way, you are a critical thinker or you're not. We're all critical thinkers at some level. We're also all not critical thinkers at some level. It's a spectrum. And the question is, where are we on that spectrum, and how do we get from where we are to a better critical thinker than where we are today? And if you come to our series on critical thinking over the next couple months, I think people will level up their critical thinking skills. And that's what I want for people. And then for people to share it with their friends on YouTube so that, we can help people level up their critical thinking skills, because that's what's going to help everybody live a better life, be better citizens, better voters, better, friends and family members, and etc. It helps us all around to be better critical thinkers.
Just a final comment there, Garrett, that I may have mentioned it before, but a little anecdote. My daughter asked me some time ago, who do we believe now? And so she asked me the question. I said, you know what? Yourself. I mean, we are in that time, in that time and age where you cannot assume immediately that this newspaper or this encyclopedia will have all the facts straight. I mean, there's too much information circulating, too much noise, too much garbage. Yeah. So you're going to have to make decisions yourself and seek the opposing points of view. You decide who's made the best pitch that is factual as opposed to emotional, right? Because we know emotions are a way of persuading, try to overcome or trump the facts. No pun intended.
Yes. So great point. And I teach my daughters the same thing. They're probably younger than yours because I started later than you, not because you're older than me, but I started later than you. And I think it's really important that we all be able to trust ourselves. And I like to say the worst lies are the ones that we tell ourselves. If we can't be brutally honest with ourselves about our own confirmation bias and our own biases, then who can we trust more than ourselves? You should not be able to trust anyone else more than yourself, and you should never trust anyone else more than yourself. If someone has a good argument, they should be able to make the argument to you in a way that resonates with you and that you understand and believe. The people who make your head spin and tell you, just trust me because I'm smarter than you, are the ones that are probably trying to rip you off the most. And I won't name the financial services company that I have in mind, but some of you may know who they were from 2008. And so that said, I want to let Will W. go. Thanks for raising your hand, Will.
Okay, and can I say something here?
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
We're getting towards the end of our time. So if you can really be cognizant of just making one comment or asking one question, so as many people who want to participate can participate.
Thank you, Michael. You're such a good co-host. You're doing Ellis justice. You had big shoes to fill and you're filling them, and I appreciate it. So Will W., go ahead.
Yeah, I I just wanted to point out how you know, as younger people, as infants, and we learn to make conclusions by thinking in images. That's how we first start off as human beings in this society. To make conclusions, we think in images, and we categorize. We try to organize these images, and we put traits into these images. And a lot of people who are not well educated, or who don't go through the formal structures of critical thinking, like formal logic, a lot of these people, they never go outside of that. They tend to only learn the methods of forming conclusions through what they have experienced, through associating images and to traits. But when it comes to the converse, the inverse, the contrapositive, you know, the four parts of formal logic, a lot of people never even encounter that. And I was in a classroom one time teaching, and I briefly brought this up to a whole bunch of high school kids, and you'll see how many will struggle with this basic structure for critical thinking. And they don't have that because they never learned how to think outside of images. So it's really important to be able to at least go through the four parts of that formal logical structure if you want to develop into a true critical thinker. Collecting evidence, fine, that's great. I mean, if you can take that to the point where you can actually use it inside our massive system, our legal system, you'll be a better individual for that. But but most of the time, as we interact with one another, I mean, we don't really need the evidence to make good conclusions about others. As long as you have that formal four parts of logical structure and you learn to use it as a critical thinker, it's of course it's much better. I mean, you'll be like a you'll be a scary person if you do collect the evidence, of course. But most of the people who are not professionals in law enforcement or legal or scientists, there's no requirement for that, because we can make judgments on people based upon empathy.
Up if you can.
And many other things, but we definitely need to know the difference between an inverse and a converse, so that we can make valid conclusions. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, no, it's super important. Like we need to help make sure that society has critical thinking skills. The bedrock of democracy relies on a well-informed public, and that means, you know, between the lines there, well-informed means has critical thinking skills. And for those of us that grew up in the US, no one taught me critical thinking skills in the US until I was a computer science major in college. You know, I took philosophy class when I was an exchange student in Spain, and I learned more philosophy and formal logic there than I did in the US school system. And the US school system, I think very intentionally, doesn't teach critical thinking skills because, quite frankly, it's much easier to govern people who can't think for themselves and just follow. And that is a very dangerous path to go down. And I would argue not even in government's best interest, but this is what they think is in their best interest. So this is where we are. Although my sister is a teacher and said under Obama, she said they were actually trying to teach critical thinking skills to a pretty extreme degree she was in elementary education. And they were, you know, what she described for me was pretty intense critical thinking skills teaching, but I don't know if that's carried on. I should ask her actually. But anyway, let me let Jakob go because we have a bunch of hands up.
Okay. So most philosophers, when they talk about critical thinking skills, they think of it as like not committing logical fallacies, thinking in modus ponens, etc. Right? But then scientists don't view critical thinking in that way. A lot of science is about like Bayesian reasoning, which is about thinking about probabilities, statistics, and you have to learn a lot of statistics to be a good scientist. And also you have to learn about like different studies and how do they like rank? Is it a randomized controlled trial? Is it a cohort study, etc., and how to rank it, right? So critical thinking skills, a lot of it is like, if I don't know, earlier I was reading stuff in the comments about people peddling stuff from RFK and his vaccine denial, right? And if you really want to be a good critical thinker that debunks all that stuff that's out there, you have to be like as knowledgeable about the science as like the real scientists that are doing the vaccine research, right? But a good thing about critical thinking is that you learn not necessarily, you learn like good heuristics of thinking. So instead of thinking of yourself, oh, I have to master vaccine research like the scientists do, you'd say, hey, who's spewing bullshit and who can I trust, right?
Exactly.
So the good thing is trust the authorities, trust the doctors who went to medical school, and don't pay attention to the BS from RFK because he's not a medical scientist. And that's the good thing that you should leave with critical thinking. Who can I trust? Who's the real authority with expertise, and who's a bullshit artist?
Yep. No, I think that's a great point, is, learning the critical thinking skills to know who you can trust is important. And, I like to say everybody uses, like everybody trusts their own judgment ultimately. I have a close friend that believes that the Bible is the word of God and that is the absolute truth, and 100% if the Bible says it, it's right, and anything that the Bible doesn't says is wrong. And a lot of people would say he has blind faith in the Bible. And I would argue, yes, he does, but he also trusted his own judgment to decide to have blind faith in the Bible. And that's what I told him. I said, look, you trusted your own judgment to decide to have blind faith in the Bible. Why not use your own judgment to decide what knowledge from the Bible is wisdom and what is not? The amount of money that you should pay for killing a slave, probably not still wisdom anymore, right? Like that might be out of date at this point, because I just don't think that having slaves is a good idea anymore. And most people, I think, would agree with me on that. I don't think it's super controversial, but ultimately we should trust our own judgment. And so great points. That said, I want to let Michael M. go.
Thanks, Garrett. So we're, in my opinion, we're all over the place, and probably one of the most important things that should have been said wasn't said. So first, let's understand that the science has a very stringent definition and approach to arriving at facts and conclusion and facts. So number one, you don't trust anyone. There is no one that is trustable without evidence and references, period. I personally, as much as I have lots of highly educated people in my family, my mother, my sister, I don't trust them. What I trust is what they tell me, and then I ask why, what was the reference? Then I go review the reference. So the process, again, this is very stringent. We don't live in the real world, doesn't work this way. But the process is you start with data. From the data that you observe, you form hypotheses. So apply this to anything, JFK or the shootings or whatever. You get some data, you collect some data, you form a hypothesis, right or wrong. Hypothesis doesn't mean you have, this is a correct conclusion and fact. And then you try to prove that hypothesis by a methodology. And remember, I discussed only two methodologies are acceptable. One is very difficult phenomenons can only be proven statistically. Closed form equations cannot be found for real world difficult problems.
Mhm.
And then two is a cause and effect experiment that's conducted and is repeated. So what do we do in this real world, in this difficult, complex world that we're not experts in everything? There is a ton of data. There's a lot of misinformation. And I agree, there's a ton of disinformation, intentional information that is released that are that they are benefiting from. Okay.
Yep.
So how do we operate in that world? One, if you are able to become an expert in a subject, again, I'm sorry, this is a very important subject. I mean, I think this is a conclusion.
Yeah, do try to finish up though, because we have a lot of hands up and only 6 minutes left.
Yeah. So the point is, you either become an expert yourself in a subject. If it is evaluating a political candidate, you better do your own research about the individual and form your own decision, because you're not trusting anyone else. Two, if you can't do that in fields like science, in fields like medicine, that's actually not a complete science, then you have to identify individuals that have the scientific background, and then you look at the counter point of view from equally qualified individual, and then you form your own opinion. Everything else is data. We are bombarded with data, which is initial assumption should be it's false unless it's proven correct. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And yeah, I will say it is important that science has a stringent definition of coming to conclusions and facts. And while I know you said you don't trust anyone, you do have to trust that the scientists did run the study that they did, but you don't have to trust it blindly, because you can run the same study yourself and try to prove them wrong, right? And that's the beauty of science, is that it's repeatable experiments. And so the only thing I would argue is that a bunch of people have been saying, well, this person said something that was wrong. Well, let's keep in mind that we've all said things that were wrong. Like, none of us is 100% accurate. And people tell me, but Garrett, ChatGPT makes stuff up. And I'm like, yes, it does. But do you know any human being that's never been wrong? Like, I've never met one. I've never met the human being that has been 100% right about everything they've said since birth until death. Like, it doesn't happen.
But I don't trust any individuals, number one. And
Right.
as a result, I don't trust the ChatGPT either.
Well, you shouldn't trust anything with 100% certainty. And that's what Rose said earlier, is we should always have skepticism, and we should listen to an open mind to everybody that we hear. And the whole purpose of this critical thinking series is to learn how to discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly out of the data that we gather using logical, reasoning. And so that said, really important points, and thank you for making them. And I want to let Mike go, and then let's try to get through the remaining hands in the 3 minutes that we have. I can't go too much longer after 9. I've been up since early. Go ahead, Mike.
You got enough data to know that you're absolutely right, but you don't have enough data or information to know that you're catastrophically wrong. Plato said that, Cicero said that, Galileo said that, Feynman said it, Neil deGrasse Tyson said it, and Jose said it. And that's where we sit. The other Michael said you shouldn't trust statistics. Now, even if you got statistics, the statistics don't say absolute things. They give you the probability of type 1 errors, probability of type 2 errors, and even define a type 3 and 4 error. That's beyond the scope here of what those errors mean. But we don't, when we get the statistics, they tell you take the vaccine, and the data was not released. So and the people who challenged the data were dismissed. There is a concept called Granger correlation, which tells you how to separate causation from correlation that's in statistics. And so even the case that you showed of autism is subject to that sort of analysis. Alan Dershowitz said something how to solve this problem in one of his things. You set up a mock courtroom where the people that are on either side of that present their statistics to the right kind of to a panel of experts on both sides of the case, and then you decide and an impartial judge, which is what they do in real courtrooms, an impartial judge who may not be an expert in the subject can then see where these discussions fall apart. Now, one final thing. In 2008, the thing you said, all of those advisors were eating each other's Kool-Aid, and most of them were wrong. And the ones who were right probably were right by accident. So you pays your money and you takes your choice. We've had situations in the COVID thing and in the global warming thing where they're saying for the good of the car, for the good of humanity, you gotta say you don't challenge the COVID vaccine. Now, some people should not have taken the COVID vaccine, and we didn't go through that because it was important to get a critical mass with imperfect information.
Okay, we're getting into multiple topics now, and there's still people with their hands raised.
Okay. The topic is that statistics has its own validation, and we should use it, and we're not using it.
When you say we're not using it, what do you mean, Mike?
Well, the object, when you get your results, if you get your results from reading Science magazine and the letters to the editor in those magazines, you get one kind of picture. When you get the results from Fox News and CNBC and MSLSD, you get a different view of the situation. And we're voting based on looking at CNBC versus Fox News, and that's not correct. Science, Nature, Cell, some of the high refereed science magazines are a better choice, but even they are not a good choice. The Dershowitz panel approach might work.
They don't talk about the topics that are discussed in politics, Mike. So I hear you. I think that they're more accurate, but when it comes to political subjects, you have to read people talking about those political subjects, or you don't have any source.
Well, they didn't, but the Dershowitz concept of getting both sides together to present that to a panel of critical thinkers and broadcasting that or publicizing that hasn't happened.
So thank you, Mike. And Alfie.
Cool. I'll try to make this question really quick.
Thank you.
So basically, like, I think all of us believe that we are very well researched and try to get like the best information possible. And under that assumption and like the ways that like engaging with information and other people's opinions about information and just like the politics of it all, I feel like it can be quite like exhausting, especially when you have to engage with things you heavily disagree with or things that are just false. Do you have any advice on how before I even say this question, like, let's say you already have all your sources and everything, and you already know that you're correct about your stances. But you need to know why you're right at the same time. Like, how do you engage with something? How do you engage with the other side, or how do you engage with like false information? Basically without like losing your sanity.
You cannot.
Yeah. So I guess Mike says it's not possible, I think, but I do think that it is possible, and it's through the FTI, I think that it can be possible because we have our one rule, which is that you have to remain polite, which means listen to people with different political opinions. You'll see in the online community and Discord, people with very different political opinions, and listen to them with an open mind and hear what they say and ask them why they think what they think. And if you ask 3 or 4 questions, Alfie, and they don't have good answers for them, or they can't answer them and they don't respond, well, maybe they don't have a good reason for believing what they believe, and your current belief is right. But always be open to the possibility, because you did say, what if you already have all your sources and you know you're correct about your stances? And if you're saying that, you're kind of giving into your confirmation bias already. Don't do that. Like, always be open that you might be wrong about something you currently believe, and circulate with people who have different opinions than you. I know that it's hard to do because it is a very like politically divisive world, and these are very emotionally charged issues. The reason we have the rule to be polite, and it's a cold hard fast rule, is I don't want them to be emotional discussions. They should be rational discussions using reason and using evidence and using facts, and that's how we should have discourse in the FTI. And it should be about politically divisive issues. I don't want to like steer away from. Some people have told me, Garrett, you shouldn't be talking about abortion in a not-for-profit. Like, you shouldn't be talking about gun control in a not-for-profit. I think we should, because these kinds of conversations need to happen. They need to be happening in a polite and rational way where people are exposed to different ideas than what they currently believe. And so, Alfie, I would say, I would encourage you to listen to people with different opinions, not because you necessarily think you're wrong. You may think you're absolutely right, but just understand where the other person is coming from and be open to the possibility that on some subjects, they may actually know something that you don't know, and they may not. And it's okay either way, as long as you're listening with an open mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sorry, I lost my Zoom
No worries.
tab. Yeah. Yeah, that
Okay.
makes sense. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's just, obviously there's some topics that are very like I would say subjective, for the lack of better terms. Like stuff like abortion. I mean, obviously I probably agree with you in your stance. But like, yeah, with things like that, it gets a little difficult. But I do agree that, like, even let's say someone is wrong in their beliefs, like, I guess sometimes you can learn from like trying to empathize with why they believe certain things.
Yeah, just understand where they're coming from. Exactly. And like, understand why they came to the conclusions they did. And honestly, like, if you ask the right questions, like, there's a guy named Daryl Davis who like made me have a newfound passion for Socratic method, who is a Black jazz musician, and he would talk to KKK members and he would ask them questions about, so why is it that you don't like Black people? And he just asked them thoughtful questions to ask them where they were coming from. He didn't tell them they were wrong. He never said they were jerks or they were, he never attacked them. He just asked them thoughtful questions to understand why they believed what they believed. And he got over 200 KKK members to quit the KKK. He got invited to the wedding of one of the daughters of one of these KKK members. I mean, that's influential, and that's the Socratic method at work, where empathizing with someone who has a very different opinion than him helped them realize why they were wrong, even though he was just asking them thoughtful questions. If you ask the right questions, you can make someone realize that they're wrong themselves. And that's the best way to show someone they're wrong, is when they realize they're wrong themselves, and you don't ever have to tell them they're wrong. They just can't answer the questions, and they realize, oh, wait, actually, I don't have a good reason for believing this.
Well, thanks.
You're welcome.
Can I say,
if you want under $800 a month places in New York City, there are ways, and you can reach out to the person who wrote, or you can email me, and I'll put my email in the chat. But it's a barter situation. So that said, I want to let
can I say one thing?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. you just talked about politeness. One of the things that some others might find offensive is the use of vulgar language. So if you can make your comment without using like the real term BS, or things like that, others might find it more palatable.
Thank you, Michael. Sean, Milo, and then we're going to close out because we're 10 minutes past and I've been up since 4:35.
Okay, I think there is a prerequisite for critical thinking. You have to be open mind. If people have ideologue or who is preoccupied ideology, it's really hard for those people to engage critical thinking. And also, so we're talking about evidence evaluation, right? Well, it's a very important thing is the source. You have to have a credible source to make a evaluation. And sometimes, even though it's a credible or concrete case, however, for example, okay, someone you know vaccinated and then infected and died to COVID. Someone is non-vaccinated. He's okay. Are you going to make a conclusion, say vaccine is bad? Say, I know many people use statistics. What is very important, statistics is called sample size, okay? You cannot use 1 case, 2 case, 3 case, 5 case and make a conclusion. No, it's wrong. I happen to have actually my first graduate degree is statistics. And later on, I get a computer science, okay? So the sample size is very important, okay? You cannot use 1 case, 2 case, 3 case to make a conclusion. Say the Robert Kennedy Jr. Look, if you have anything related to medical issue, are you going to listen to a doctor or listen to a lawyer? If you want to buy a house, are you going to listen to a Garrett, he's a computer scientist, or ask Trump, who is in real estate since the 1970s? It's obvious, right? But why we have to listen to JFK Jr., a lawyer, rather than listen to a doctor? There may be 1 or 2, 3, 4 doctors, eye doctor, ear doctor. They may have different opinion. Well, it's better to listen to epidemiologist who specialize in infection disease, right? It's so obvious, if you have this kind of thinking, there's no argument. I think I'm done, okay. I'm always rambling about. I'm done already. It's past 9.
Thanks. That said, Mr. Milo.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So, oddly enough, well, it seems to be a bit of a theme, and it relates really strongly to what Sean said. And so my question, it's an observation. It's a question embedded in an observation. So I'm noticing that there is going to be situations, more often actually than not, where I don't know all the facts because I'm not a scientist. I'm not a microbiologist. I'm not a lawyer, whatever. I'm not a realtor in the Midwest, right? There's going to be situations where I'm not the expert and I more or less have to rely on the trust of another individual. So the observation that I made is that—
No, you don't.
Well, don't necessarily have to, but ultimately, and I might be wrong in that assumption, that is a baked in assumption, but assuming you are in a situation where you more or less are going to be trusting someone, it seems as though it's important, almost like how you would set up a logic gate in a computer. It's important that you are self-aware about the fact that you're making the decision to trust someone rather than saying this is based off of my own expertise. It's important to distinguish those two those two determinations of truth, right? Is this based off of, I know, I've verified, I've done the experiments, or is this based off of, okay, I've deferred expertise onto someone else? And if you split those two things, then you're able to keep track. And so I guess what I'm asking, so there's my observation, and the question within that, is there a history of, or is there guidelines for, you know, regular maintenance of that awareness, of a good way to approach that attitude of splitting the two things, of being aware of that? Is that something someone 1,000 years ago discovered, or am I just a genius talking about it for the first time? That's a joke. That's just a joke. But yeah, that's my question. Is this a thing? Is there a right way to do it?
So, so I don't know if there's any ancient wisdom in that area, but I think that it is a little bit of genius for you to be thinking about it that way. And that's what I was referring to earlier, where I said, you know, the person that I know that trusts in the Bible as the law of God, well, didn't you trust your own judgment? I think your point of, you need to be aware of where you're putting your faith in other people, and is that faith well-founded, and is it well-founded in every area in which you're putting that faith? And I do think, you know, that the Bible is God-inspired, and I think there's a lot of great wisdom there, but I don't think that 100% of it is totally timeless. And the example that I gave of how much do you pay for a slave that you've killed, I don't think is timeless wisdom, because I don't think we should have slaves at all. But at the time of the Bible, it was a foregone conclusion that everyone had slaves, so that was not controversial at the time. And, you know, to think that a document that's that long would be 100% perfect and timeless is, you know, I think you know, not realistic. And so I think your point of, we need to be conscious of how much faith are we putting in whom, and is that faith well-founded, like, is a good one. And I think we should be thinking about that. And you know, and Steve just put the 3 C's of Socrates, which is the assertion true, is it good, and is it useful? Those are good questions to be asking. Is it true, is it good, and is it useful? And so I like those, but I do think your point is very well taken, that we need to know who we're putting our faith in, and that's what critical thinking skills is about, is like, you know, like how much faith can we put in whom, in and in what areas? You know, a person who is a researcher of the coronavirus vaccine, that's done firsthand accounts of research on it, I probably would have more faith in than a person on social media who says the coronavirus vaccine is, you know, a farce and it's going to kill you all, and it's I think what it's called is the mark of the beast, right? Where a lot of, you know, not a lot, but some religious people call it the mark of the beast, where, you know, this is a biblical reference to basically, I think, like swearing fealty to Satan or something like that. And so, you know, I think it's, you know, so yeah, all I would say is there's a lot of wisdom in what you said, and I think that it's a topic that was unlikely to have come up in the ancient world, mostly because the amount of disinformation that we deal with today probably didn't exist then, because there were clear lines of authority, and authorities had a more generally, like, I think there was probably more faith in the systems and structures of society, and probably it was more well-founded than we might think. Although Socrates made a fool of a lot of those, you know, in positions of power at the time, and that's why he was sentenced to death for quote unquote corrupting the youth. In other words, embarrassing the powers that be. But that said, that's a topic for another night. We could talk about Socrates. But I do want to kind of close out and say that I appreciate everyone's great comments, appreciate everyone's questions, and I did not get to see everything in the chat. So if I missed something, feel free to write me in the online community and Discord. I'm going to try to capture a few things here, but I tend not to be able to see stuff after the events. Hope everyone has a great night. Hope to see you all at the next event next Tuesday evening. And thank you all for coming, and take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Garrett. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.